Shall we call the meeting to order? All right. Start with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Why don't we move to the roll call, please, Cookie?
Jackie Nunez. Here. Clifford Robbins.
Here.
Rafael Reyes.
Here.
Susan Rowinski.
Here.
Greg St. Clair.
Present.
All right, we'll move on to the consent calendar, and actually we have two sets of minutes, and I think we need to approve those separately because we had some absent members at each of the meetings. Do I have a motion for the October 9th minutes? Yes.
I do have a question on the October 9th minutes here, and I'm just curious. There are two, I think those minutes highlight two potential agenda items that I have raised, and I thought one of them may have already been agendized or approved by the commission, and that has to do with the South Bay recycling. Does anybody have any, Raphael, I know you mentioned you thought it was agenda-sized. I thought it was.
I had the idea that it had, but I wasn't
Yeah.
at that specific meeting, so my recollection is a little fuzzy here on that.
Does anybody remember?
I
thought
believe we discussed and then deferred because you weren't there to explain and push for it. That's my recollection.
All righty.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we can certainly raise that again at the end of this meeting and consider that for agendizing. So do I have a motion?
I'll move approval, the October minutes.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions?
I was not here. Abstain.
Abstain. Okay, moving on to the next minutes, we have the November 13th minutes. We have a motion for approval of the November 13th minutes, please?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And I abstain.
All right, with that, we'll move on to the next item, and we have the bicycle master plan.
Excuse me if you could, I just point of order.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have
Thank you. Public
comment.
comment. Thank you for catching that. Do we have any public comment on any
No,
items
I don't
not
have
on the
any.
agenda? Thank you.
That's why I had to bring it up.
All right, now moving on to the bicycle master plan.
Thank you. Hi. Good evening. Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner with Public Works. I'm here tonight to present with our consultant, Megan Woolley-Osdahl from Tool Design Group on the 2020 San Mateo Bicycle Master Plan and our draft plan. So with that, I will turn it over to Megan for the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Sue Ellen. Hi, good evening. We're excited to be here tonight to be presenting the draft bicycle master plan. This is the culmination of over a year-long worth of good work and outreach, and we're excited to show you what's in the plan. So I'll be walking through how the plan was developed, also review the elements of the plan, and talk about next steps. So this plan began in August of last year, and since that time, we've been working on the different analyses and data collection, as well as community outreach and developing the proposed bicycle network. We have visited with come to you, the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission 4 times throughout the process. And so for our next steps, we will be heading to council in early February for their consideration and possible adoption. So the plan was developed with 2 pieces of critical information. One is community input, and the other was a data-driven analysis. So we began our public outreach in December of last year with an open house. We also had an online interactive map where folks could give their comments about where they like to bike today, where they'd like to see improvements in the future. And then we've also been meeting regularly with advisory groups throughout the process. So that includes yourselves as well as the Citizen Advisory Group, which is comprised of community members, and the Technical Advisory Group, which is comprised of city staff. We also held a citywide bike tour and a pop-up separated bike lane in March to give folks a sense of some of the new facilities that we were recommending as a part of the plan. Then after the bicycle network was drafted, we went out and held about 6 events throughout June and July and got a lot of feedback on the network and great comments that we then incorporated and revised the network based on the comments. Also, as a part of the plan, we also conducted an analysis. So we conducted 4 different types of analyses, and I believe that we've presented these to you previously. These included the collision analysis, a level of traffic stress to see which areas of the city were high or low stress, which streets were high or low stress to bike on, as well as a bicycle network connectivity analysis, which looked at which areas of the city are well connected today with bicycle facilities, and a trip potential analysis, which looked at which areas of the city are likely to have high bicycle trips. And this is going to be schools and transit centers and other retail and commercial destinations. So to round out our public outreach, last weekend, last Saturday, we held a open house to share the plan with the community and also to share the prioritized bicycle network as well as the project list. And we had a lot of good questions and a lot of people giving their input about why they're excited to see this plan and see the plan come to fruition. So now I'm going to give you a brief walkthrough of the plan document itself. The plan is comprised of 6 chapters. The first, the intro, just gives you a sense of how the plan was developed and some of the key challenges and opportunities for the San Mateo Bicycle Network. The second chapter outlines the goals and objectives for the plan, and these include connectivity, safety and comfort, community, equity, and ridership. And so for each of the goals, we've also outlined objectives and metrics, and these metrics will help the city implement the plan and then track implementation over time. The third chapter looked at the existing bicycle network. So we needed a sense of what's out there today before we could start planning for the future. And so we did that through field visits. We did that through looking at the city's GIS data and also through community feedback too about which facilities they used often today. So then we got into the meat of the matter with the proposed bicycle network. So you can go to this next slide. So what we've really found throughout the research that we rely upon and throughout the work that we've done at Tool Design is that in order to really move the needle on bicycling, you need to create a connected and comfortable network. And so what this means is that you really serve folks who are interested in biking today but are concerned about safety. So this is the interested but concerned group of riders, and this comprises about 60% of folks, basically, of the San Mateo community and then people nationwide. So what the basic question that we ask is, can everyone get to where they want to go? So when they leave their house, do they know that they can get to their destination safely and comfortably by bike? So to help plan the network, we use the chart that's shown here. This is from the AASHTO Guide for the Development of Bicycle Facilities. And it allows us to use a data-driven process to develop the network. So we take a look at what are the volumes, what are the vehicle volumes on a street, and we pair that with the speeds to come up with a proposed network or a proposed facilities for the streets. And then we pair that with our knowledge of the streets and with the community's experience and city staff's experience to come up with the proposed network. So this is the network that's presented in the plan. It includes 70 infrastructure projects. It includes 102 miles of bicycle facilities, and this expands your network by 25 miles, but it also upgrades many of the facilities. So today you may have a bicycle route that's only signage and paint on the ground, and we're proposing that it become a bike lane or a buffered bike lane. This plan also includes separated bike lanes and bike boulevards, which are new facilities for San Mateo, and also identifies identifies intersections that need improvements in order to make the network comfortable for the interested but concerned community. So these are the 6 facilities that we've recommended, and we've also spoken to intersection treatment types in the plan as well. So, we can go to the next slide, please. So, in the 5th chapter, there's a recognition that you can build the facilities on the ground, but people may also need more support in order to bicycle. And so Chapter 5 really looks at the support programs and policies that the city can put into place and can work with partners to implement in order to get folks biking. So this chapter is organized by the 6 E's of a bicycle community, and it includes engineering, encouragement, education, enforcement, equity, evaluation, and planning. So there are a list of the existing programs that the city is currently conducting, and we build upon that good work with recommended programs as well. So then the final chapter looks at implementation and funding. And so one of the key elements of this chapter is the prioritized bike network. So there's the recognition that the city has limited budget, limited staff time, and so through this prioritization process, we were able to identify which projects really rose to the top in priority. And so there's the project list that we've developed is organized by high, medium low, and low priority projects. And this prioritization network was developed based on a scoring criteria that's also outlined in the plan. So in addition to the prioritization map, we still have some additional work that's coming soon. So we have developed cost estimates for the different types of facilities. So what we're doing now is we're taking the project list that's been drafted, and we are working to estimate each of the costs for the different bike facilities, and that will be included as a part of the final plan. And then we're also developing concept designs. So the city recognizes that a plan is really integral to implementing new bike facilities, but the next step really is developing engineering designs. And so these concept designs will be the first step in developing those. And we're going to develop between 10 to 15 concept designs for different segments in the city, and then also example treatments for intersections. So with the concept designs, this is still a draft list. We are ironing out the details with the city, but we thought you would be interested in seeing this. So these are the candidate concept designs for the street segments, and there are 4 listed here. And then we also have candidates for intersections. So there are 8 listed here. The reason that there are more intersections is that we find that intersections are the most stressful piece of the network. It's where bicyclists interact more with cars, they interact more with each other, and so that's why we have a very strong focus on the intersections and developing the concept designs for those. So the plan is moving forward, and we're planning to take the plan to council for possible adoption on February 3rd. And at that time, the final plan will include the complete project list that's based on the proposed bike network map that's in the plan, as well as a full list of cost estimates, the concept designs, and the final appendices. So thank you very much, and let us know if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. This is super exciting, going from, in some cases, zero miles of bike lanes and bike boulevards to lots of miles. And I think this plan truly reflects enhancing the safety and comfort of all residents here in San Mateo. I think it's super comprehensive. I think one of the questions I had was around 3rd and 101, and I recognize that this has come to the commission many times, and we've had many times to provide feedback and comments in the community as well. So just this one question, which is around 3rd and the Highway 101 intersection. Does that include the access point to the Samtrans bus that's underneath the freeway? So I know that crossing is somewhat tricky and hard to access, so I'm just wondering if that's in the consideration for the design concept.
What we've identified in the concept, or in the project that we'll be doing the concept design for, is the access to and from the 3rd Avenue bike ped bridge that's actually on 3rd Avenue. The pedestrian access and bicycle access, if you're coming down off of there and going to the Samtrans bus stop, is not at this point contained in there, but we can see if we can include that. That hasn't actually come up in discussion before, so thanks for raising that.
Sure, I would definitely recommend to look at that, just in terms of access and looking at our bus stops here in San Mateo and ensuring access there. That's the only question I have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have seen this plan a few times, and it just gets better and better. It's great. Thank you. I have a question, and maybe I missed it. Is it the case that the actual project list, we don't have it, right? I was looking, other than the slide. I didn't see anything in the couple hundred pages that I skimmed through, and I'm old-fashioned. I didn't print the whole thing, but I printed a few, and I could not find that list, right?
That's right. So developing the project list, I'll just be honest, it takes a lot of time. And so we do have the list developed at this point. So we were able to, we really wanted to get the plan out before the holiday season hit. So we're kind of catching it right before the holidays. And so therefore we made the decision to open up the public comment period before the full list had been finalized. It's been finalized now, and the city will be posting it on their website.
Okay, and is it prioritized, or is it just a list?
It is prioritized.
It's prioritized.
So the way that the list is organized is that the high and medium high projects are grouped together, and then the low and medium low projects are grouped together, just for ease of kind of consumption at this point. But the city will have, and we will have as a part of the plan, the full project list, and then another version where it's prioritized. So folks will be able to take a look at it in both formats.
And will there be cost estimates associated?
So the project list, that the city will be posting shortly will not have cost estimates. However, we are working on those now, and so the full plan will include cost estimates.
Okay, and then the concept designs, that's later on, I assume.
That's right. We're beginning conversations about the concept designs. It's sort of a domino effect. So we needed to finalize the prioritization, which we've done, and we've also recently finalized this list of which concept designs will be developed, and those will be coming next. And that's typical for a process like this. It's typical that you start with the planning document, and then the engineering work kind of comes as a second phase after folks have had a lot of time to give feedback. And I'll say that your colleague's comment just now is kind of a prime example of that, because Commissioner Nunez just gave a great piece of advice that can be now incorporated into the concept design potentially. So we like to get feedback before really digging into the designs.
Okay, and then a question probably for staff. I don't want to hold things up, but is this project list and cost estimate, is this going to come back to the commission at all? Or are we going to be asked to send this plan on to council for their adoption in February without having seen those?
In the current project schedule, we do not have another meeting with this commission prior to going to city council. If commission would like to see those finalized documents before this goes to council, then the schedule can accommodate that, but it would be pushed out to do so.
Yeah, well, I'll defer to my colleagues, and we have questions, but I'll give you a glance at my comment is that I'm not comfortable pushing the plan forward without talking about, pun intended, where the rubber hits the road, which of those items. Anyway, that's my questions are done. Thank you. Thanks.
And by the way, I would concur with Commissioner Robbins on that as well. I'm just going to open up with a couple of items here. And I want to talk about motorized devices. My understanding, according to California law, is motorized devices need to use, and they could be skateboards, scooters, whatever they are, need to use the bike lanes. I'm going to call them micromobility bike lanes or whatever. And then human-powered scooters and skateboards use the sidewalk. So, my question, this is one of my two questions, is how does the city plan to educate, or how are you going to notify those that are on motorized micro transportation, e-scooters and skateboards, that they need to be, that is, how do you notify, or what signage do you use that they use these bike lanes and not the sidewalks? Because, the sidewalks are very attractive, to them, and partly because they're safer, and they, and particularly it gets more attractive as we start to put in the ADA ramps, and they can move from one segment of a sidewalk to another rather flawlessly. So what's in this plan that is going to divert those types of people, or the scooters and the skateboards, onto the bike lanes?
That's a really great question, and we had a very similar question come up at our open house on Saturday.
Yeah.
So we were able to have a really good discussion around that. The fully recognizing that on the cover it says Bicycle Master Plan, and we've talked about this before, about the name of the plan. Tool came up with a great list of other options, and none of them quite worked. And current nomenclature really talks about bikes because micromobility is still new-ish. There's a new term, lit?
Yeah.
Yes, I cannot remember what.
Yes, there's a new term that's kind of growing in the industry called lit lanes, light individual transport lanes, and it's recognizing exactly what you're bringing up, that bicycle lanes or bicycle facilities aren't just for bikes anymore, that it's also for scooters and other forms of micromobility.
So as part of that discussion on Saturday, there was a recognition that on all of our maps we say bicycle network. Mm-hmm. And that does not reflect the fact that the plan is written for micromobility devices as well. It's in the text, but when people look at the figures, they're not seeing that. So that's a comment that I really took to heart, that we need to be updating as we move toward the final plan. In terms of education, one of the support programs is to support micromobility through plans for micromobility users, including education. And that's something that we do need to focus on so that they are aware of where they legally should be using those devices. But the information is throughout the plan, but admittedly, when you're looking at the maps, it does not jump out at you right now.
Yeah, and it does not. And that's going to become a growing issue, particularly as we talk about the last mile, and it's these devices that will move people around on that last mile. Some things I've seen done in other cities on this. I have seen surface street signage that includes not only bicycles but scooters and skateboards. There appears to be some sort of symbology that's available. You can have vertical signage. These are all the things, police enforcement, because if they are on a sidewalk, that's California state law prohibits that. So I think that needs to be, that is, I think, understated in the plan. And I know we've talked about this in the past. It might be sprinkled in there, but it's not as strong a focus as I think should be, being that these devices are a key element in the city's transportation plan. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to give some thought to that. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, can we go to, I think it was Table 6. You had Table 6 up there, the map. Yeah, thank you. And then let's go down, yep, and let's go down to the map that's there, and then we'll toggle between these documents. Thank you. Okay.
You want to go?
Yep, down to the map.
We don't, here we go.
Here it is, yeah.
I don't know if I can make it.
I think if you
Large.
press the plus sign up there, there we are. Okay, great. I just, yeah, and I want to focus in on a southern part of San Mateo, and specifically the area that encompasses the county hospital. The county hospital is our largest employer with over 3,000 employees in the city. And about once a day, when we have the shift, the day shift, 3,000 people or so let out with their cars, and thus part of the reason for the gridlock on Hillsdale Boulevard between 101 and El Camino. And I looked at this, and with all these people driving into work, it behooves us to try to encourage them to bike or use some sort of other micromobility product to get to work. You can't eliminate the aspect on Hillsdale Boulevard, but you might be able to mitigate it a little bit. So I thought, if you look at where the hospital is, it is between 39th and 37th Avenue. 37th Avenue would be one block, what would be to the right of 36th. And 37th Avenue also has a lot of bus stations as well, which is also attractive. And so my questions is, knowing that this is our largest employer, they let out a lot of people at the same time, backs up Hillsdale, it behooves us to encourage them to also use alternative transportation. And I don't see it in this plan. What I'm going to recommend here is, 36. I see 36th Avenue, and I understand why it's there. But the hospital is on 37th, and that's where all the bus stops are. I don't know if there's a way to move from 36th to 37th. And then, in addition, I believe both, if we were to look at that, 37th and 39th, and you've got the north-south borders of the hospital. And then give them a higher priority. I was surprised that that 39th and 37th fell in the lowest priority bucket. And I say that because the hospital, if you look at the hospital, and I went through and I looked at your criteria, if we scroll up a little ways to the criteria, particularly, if we look, if you can just go down to the next page. Thank you, Sue Ellen. If we look at, what am I looking at? Ridership. This, to me, the hospital with 3,000 employees letting out at the same time has a tremendous potential to attract some ridership. And then if we go to, so that factor, if I was to look at that factor, my instincts would tell me the hospital would actually probably score pretty high on ridership. Mm-hmm. And then if we were to go to the following, the other factor, in the prior page, and keep going up, thank you, up, there we are. And if I was to look at connectivity, destination served, the hospital is 500 feet within bus stops. It is close to a school. It is close to commercial areas, 37th and 39th through 42nd. It's close to a library. That's within about a quarter mile. It's the Hillsdale Branch Library. So to me, I was very surprised to see that 39th and what I'm hoping to be 36th or 37th, you can see my argument for 37th, rated in the low. So, that's a question I have. Yeah. And if anybody would like to respond.
Sure. Those comments are valid. 37th, as you mentioned, is commercial, and so that is likely why a facility was not recommended on that street in particular, because of the vehicular demand and the parking. In terms of the prioritization, being in a residential neighborhood, the streets tend to be lower volume and lower speed. The bus stops there don't have a high enough frequency to be considered high quality transit, and that was the indicator for the transit stop, was a frequency of 15 minutes or less. So I think for those reasons is my suspicion of why that may have scored on the lower side, without having the exact spreadsheet or GIS map in front of me. But I think that we can look back at that and see if there was any issue. The prioritization did focus in on, you'll see the ranking was connectivity was essentially weighted the highest, because we did want to connect to transit, to our key city destinations, the parks, the libraries, to our schools. And in those terms, we did not identify hospitals as a key destination. And perhaps that's something that we need to consider, but we can look back at the prioritization effort for that specific location to see if there is an issue.
Sure. Buses, the 292 and the 294 go up Hacienda and then down 37th roughly about every 15, 20 minutes. So it's because they come out of Hillsdale. So, but maybe we can revisit the hospital. I think that was something that was left off on this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you again for all your work and effort. Question, on some of these maps that we were doing, the medium priority and places like that, how did we get those on certain streets? Because again, we don't have like a blank map. We have congested blocks. And I even see somewhere like South Grant, where it goes down all the way to Hayward Park. You can't even get through half of the blocks, let alone to make it a bike area down there. I don't get it. Is that going to be a pathway? Is it going to just be on the street? Is it just a recommendation kind of mentality? Does it say, hold it, this is where we'd like people to go, it's a good area? Or are they going to be designated bike lanes? Because if you don't have room already, how are you going to fit them?
So in the prioritized bike network, Grant is a bicycle boulevard. So that means that it will be the bike facility. That bike facility was recommended from an analysis of how many vehicles use that road daily and the speeds. And so it was determined that that would be a low stress facility with a bike boulevard. And so what that means is that that road will have traffic calming along the route, as well as signage to indicate that it's a bike boulevard, but it will require traffic calming to slow vehicle speeds in order to accommodate the bicyclists.
Along like Grant, which I think is not a good spot on the block at all, because a lot of the streets are almost too narrow for people to drive cars down the street because of the way the curb and gutters and the way people park, let alone have a bike. But do we, or are we reaching out to citizens who live on these blocks to say, here's our potential that we are going to be putting these bike and these potential calmings and everything out, and what these are going to be, instead of they just wake up one day and said, well, it was pushed through by the council and by Public Works, and it's great for the city, but we have no idea, because that's when usually citizens scream foul.
I'm really glad you asked that. We've discussed this throughout the plan, that we are doing really robust community outreach for the plan as a whole. So we have gotten the opportunity to talk to a lot of the city. Obviously not everybody in a specific neighborhood or adjacent to a specific project. That said, the project list lists out all the individual projects that each would then have to be done from design to outreach to construction. So outreach would be done as a part of each individual project. We wouldn't lean back and say, we did a lot of outreach as part of the plan, so we're just going to keep going. We do, in Public Works, do outreach for every single project that we do, and that I anticipate would be no different with these.
Yeah, because I was thinking it would be imperative to have a street, instead of them being all of a sudden saying, surprise, here we come, good, bad, or indifferent, that the public has to know, especially if you're going to be putting any calming items on. And again, regarding the cost, is this almost like the rush to get her done? Is there a reason that we're doing it in the format, like we're going to miss some funding, some grant money? Is there something like that? Because it almost seems like somewhere in the old-fashioned trains coming from back east to California, let's just get rolling and then go as we go, instead of saying, here's a budget, here's an implementation of a budget, here's our plan, here's what we think we're going to spend, and here's how much we're going to spend each year.
There's not particularly a rush in terms of funding or anything from staff's perspective. Again, we are very open to coming back to the commission with a finalized plan prior to going to council. It would push out the schedule. It may increase the budget slightly. But if that is the commission's desire, then we're open to doing that. In terms of moving forward to council in February, I think there's just a desire to finish a process that we've been doing since August 2018, and to be able to start implementing the projects.
Do we have a overall budget and stages planned? Do we have, if we can get this percentage done and that percentage done, and we're looking to, like, we're going to say it's going to take a year and we want to have a minimum of this, maximum if everything goes great. Do we have that in play or no?
Thank you for the question. So the city has limited capital project funds. We currently have dedicated funding for projects like the street resurfacing, street reconstruction projects. That's dedicated, been dedicated by the council. There's other money that we receive from the Transportation Authority or the state that is dedicated for certain aspects. Measure S funds for the half-cent or the quarter-cent sales tax extension. Of course, we're going to the levee and pump projects, and then the traffic action plans as well. So there hasn't been any specific money dedicated towards bike plans. What we've been doing is two things. One, when we can do something as we repave a street and there's some need for some bike facilities, we have been doing that over the last several years. We've got quite a few things done that may not have even been on a plan, but made good sense to do. And then apply for grants whenever we can to get some of these various projects done. So that's really where we're at, and the funding is really based on what are council's priorities.
Thank you.
Great, and thank you for this work. And I appreciate getting a chance to review this. For me, the plan presents a lot of really good information in terms of overall strategy, the framework for making decisions, and the core drivers that we're pursuing here. So I think that's all great. I am having a little bit of trouble without having clarity on the proposed projects and what sort of budget that we're talking about. Have we received, and this is both looking forward and looking backwards. I was reviewing my records, and it looks like the last time we had a discussion of the bicycle plan, in terms of what has been done was October of last year, but I'm not clear on whether we've received a roll-up of everything that's been done under the old plan. How much money, what was accomplished? I mean, was it half a mile? Was it 10 miles? I don't have a sense of that, and having a sense of that would also get a sense of what's our probability of success with the funding sources that we intend to pursue, and what can we actually accomplish under the probable funding, what sort of time frame for that. It would be really useful to have both that history and what we see going forward in terms of the probability of getting how much to accomplish how much. And I don't have a sense of that in terms of what's in front of us at this point. Do we have a roll-up of what's been done since 2011?
Yes, thank you for sending that question. We did compile a list of the status of high priority projects from the 2011 Bike Master Plan. Sorry. 9 of those have been completed. That added 5.79 miles. And the majority of those are class 3, so that's shared bike facilities. One of those projects was class 2 bike lanes. And then 3 of the high priority projects are currently underway, 2 under construction with the grade separation project, and then 1 currently in design, that's the bike boulevard along 28th Avenue.
Great, thank you. So, and of the network that we have here, what's the total mileage that we're looking to add?
It's 25 new bike lanes, but then some existing lanes would be upgraded. So
25 miles.
I'm sorry?
How many miles?
Oh, 25 miles. And then some would be upgraded. I also wanted to add that bicycle planning has really evolved since the 2011 plan, and what was done at that time was, I will say, good at that time. And since then, there is an incredible increase in the interest in biking. There's many more grant sources. Separated bike lanes, which are now sort of the pinnacle of the types of facilities we recommend, were not even Caltrans approved facilities in 2011. So I guess that's just to say that while that plan set a good course, that there's just so much evolved thinking since then, and we're excited to have it really reflected in this new network as well.
Right. So that all makes sense. But this is, in terms of what the new plan is quite a big leap from what has actually been done in the past 10 years, right? So part of what I think needs to be part of the conversation is, what's the budget requirement for getting those 25 miles? Of the funding sources we have, what's the probability that we would actually get that budget, right? And then you can have a prioritization discussion if there's a gap there, which seems likely, right? Because these are all grants and you're not going to get most of them. You might get a 50% hit rate if you're lucky, right? Is there a gap? How important is that gap? How does that weigh relative to other priorities that we have from a funding standpoint? And, should we consider some dedicated funding or not? Then we can have, I think, a little more informed conversation for the process that I'm feeling that we don't quite have the tools to have that conversation right now.
Yes, I understand, because you want to be able to see the list and see the estimates, so I understand that. And I'll say, and this won't come as news, many cities are asking these exact same questions. And one of the things that we found most useful in many cities is to implement rapid implementation strategies. And so what that means is where we have, for example, where we have a separated bike lane proposed for Fashion Island Boulevard, that in the near term it might not be realistic to implement kind of the Cadillac version that's concrete facilities and just beautiful miles of separated bike lanes. But then in the interim, you can really do temporary and lower cost implementation options. And we have really been talking a lot with the city staff about that, and they knew of many of the examples we've already given. So you have a very educated city staff already. And so I just say that to say that the cost estimates that we are developing is kind of full build. They're planning level cost estimates, but it's full build for sort of the Cadillac version. So there are other lower cost options that many cities are implementing. They're seeing a rise in ridership, and then that over time, they're able to turn those into more permanent facilities.
Sure. But it sounds like, where there's still work to be done is to think about, okay, what's the total prospective Cadillac plan budget, but what's the staging of this? What's the probability based on the funding sources that we have available, and to lay that out. And if we can have a conversation here around that, then I think we can bring a more informed conversation to the council. So why don't we move on to...
Can I comment on that?
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, what Brad said was that there was little to no funding allocated from the city perspective, which is what's typical of bike plans in most cities, right? And
Sure.
so when we're thinking about budgeting and whether it's informative for the commission to see what a budget would look like, when we're banking on grant funding, I'm not sure if that would be helpful for us.
So what I'm proposing here is having come from grant fundraising in the grant world, you take a look at the entire list of grants and you say, oh, there's so many dollars, potentially out of these different sources. What's the probability that I'm going to actually get some percentage of these? And you take a look at your past track record and you make some estimates, right? And then you can have a reasonably informed conversation. Are we? We have, let's say, 40% chance that we'll get, out of this bucket of grants, some percentage of dollars, and then we'll actually be able to do some. And then that amounts to, some percentage of the overall plan. Because if our estimate is 0, right, we're not going to get, we have a long list of grants, but we're not going to get any of them. Okay, that's informative. Or, it's some percentage, or maybe we're going to get all of our budget out of that. We have high confidence. It's a totally different conversation, right? So it's not useful to do a plan here if we don't actually think there's any way of getting it funded. But we have to have some sense of what we're going to get. Otherwise, it's not that useful.
Through the chair, if I could add a comment, corollary sort of. One of the discussions that we've had in the document in the funding strategy is that the city has traditionally relied on grant funding for bike projects. We do want to look toward other options for funding. The traffic impact fee is one option that we're looking at in updating that and adding additional projects from this plan. We're starting the move from level of service to vehicle miles traveled for CEQA analysis, and there's a possibility that the TIF would be adapted for that, or there would be a different fee based on vehicle miles traveled. That would be another opportunity. And as Brad mentioned, the funding is based on council priorities, so it's possible if there's higher ridership in the future that those may shift and support more bike projects.
Right, and that all makes sense. So I think that will be informed by, again, what our confidence level is in these grant sources that we will get some or amount of that.
If I may add, their grants are always ever evolving, and some come into fruition that you didn't expect that produce a large amount of money. It is very hard to predict the future and see what grants may be available. It is absolutely critical to have a prioritized list in order to go for any grants when they do become available. And again, you don't know when they do or when new sources are out there. So you do want to have a prioritized list that's larger than what you reasonably expect that you can get.
Sure.
Because sometimes certain projects are eligible for a grant when others aren't, based on various features of them. So I would urge you to prioritize really based on your understanding of the need in the community, and not based on like a funding allocation plan over time.
Sure, but if I understood correctly, there's the possibility of a conversation around, some dedicated funding, and to inform that, we need to understand what the overall prospects are for the other funding sources.
There's been discussion about what other funding sources may be available. There have not been specifics.
Okay, yeah. Other comments or questions here?
I guess one of my questions is, how much time would this set back if we were to, say that we're not comfortable moving forward without this, like how much time would we have to set that back? Because I heard you say that there was some budget implications to that as well.
This is totally off the cuff. So I'm like, I wish I had my spreadsheets in front of me to be able to give you a very analytical answer. I would say we are currently in the process right now of developing the cost estimates. We're just getting started on that because we just finalized the project list. So understanding that and that you meet monthly, we would have to talk with the city and look at your agenda, but I would say it would push it back a month or two. And it does add budget in the sense of we're a consulting firm, and so my time to be here and to prepare the presentation and that kind of thing. And then just as you extend a process, it just adds money. It just more check-in calls with the city and additional things pop up. So I just say that it kind of depends on what is most important, but Sue Ellen was right that as the timeline gets extended by even a month or two, there may be additional fees.
All right, so we probably, Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, just I want to reemphasize what I hinted at, and others have joined in on the comment. Now that we are at the actual comment phase, and I don't think I'm alone up here, I'm a veteran of the planning process, and I'm on the general plan subcommittee now. So I understand the value of a blueprint without getting too far into the weeds, but I think, and I'm also loath to hold the process up in a big way. But in this case, particularly since the prioritized, there we go, list seems to already be in play, and it sounds like the cost estimates are underway. I'm not too sure that I would want to get too much into the weeds on grants and so forth, but it would seem to me that we wouldn't be really fulfilling our obligation to the city if we passed on a plan that was purely a blueprint when they're going to see a project list, the council is, and estimates, and we've not commented, and maybe more importantly, we haven't acted as a conduit for the public. There may be two people, but whatever, at least there's public notice, it's out there, they can chime in, as they will do, as Greg was mentioning, that obviously on any individual project, but it seems important enough that that we at least fulfill those functions. And so what we pass on to the council, who's got 40 trillion things on their plate, at least is something that's been blessed by us and at least gone through the public at least once. I think that'll be a greater value to them. So that would be my request.
Why don't we move on to public comment?
I actually have, let's go to public comment.
Okay. Do we have any speakers?
Yes, Mark Elliott.
Good evening, Council. My name is Mark Elliott. I live on 28th Avenue in Bay Meadows. I'm here to support the plan. I think it's a fantastic effort. It's well thought out, it's thorough, comprehensive, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it implemented. Related to that, though, the implementation really is the thing. The plan is important, but building stuff for the community is really the most important thing. And based on that, I had a look at the previous plan, the 2011 plan, and assessing the high priority projects list, of which there were 28, and I heard a comment on that earlier. I have to disagree. I don't see that many projects being fully complete. By my analysis, we've completed 4. And we have about 12 that are partially completed and 10 that are with no progress at all. So looking back at that, thinking, how are we going to move forward in a different manner that would be more successful? I think this plan has to acknowledge that that list actually was not really prioritized. And we need to figure out why, over the last 8 years, we really didn't accomplish what we intended to do in the 2011 plan, But most importantly, I think we need a strategy for how to do this plan in a new way. And the only mechanism I can think of for really presenting that would be this current plan. So there needs to be a section in this plan that actually talks about the history and what we should do to do better, essentially. Second point is, which has been alluded to on several occasions here, is the whole notion of funding. And that's critical to making sure this plan gets implemented. And I really think part of this is this reliance on grant funding, which has been mentioned before, is somewhat, I wouldn't say tenuous, but it's difficult to predict. The magnitudes are there, they vary, and the probabilities of success vary. And so we really need to think about a strategy where we use more local and internal funding. So for instance, the traffic impact fee is one, but the gas tax is another, Measure W, Measure S funds, and the general fund. We also use the Measure A sales tax fund quite a lot. But I think we need to have something in the plan that we can present to the city council, because they're ultimately the ones that are going to talk about the capital improvement program. We need to have something in the plan that presents to them what we think we need. And the current plan merely lays out all the possible sources. Here are all the ways you could get money, all the options. I think the plan has to go a lot farther. It has to say, we really need this amount of money over this period of time. It has to be sustained, and here's what we propose you do. The city council, of course, can say yes or no on that, but the Public Works Department, through this plan, needs to say, this is what we want. Thank you very much.
Adam Lorraine.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. I think I'll start by probably just giving a verbal +1 to everything Mark just said. And I appreciate the discussion that's being had at the commission today on this report. As a member of the public, I too was surprised to come to the launch on last Saturday and see no defined project list. And I just said to myself, oh, well, I imagine they'll have it at the commission meeting, and I'll take a look at it then. So for it to not be there, I guess I was a little surprised. And I understand the frustrations of the commission for having to essentially move it on to city council without having that available. Although, of course, the plan does present an outline as to what's being prioritized, what the overall vision is, and so on and so forth. And so in a way, the commission is being asked whether it is aligned with the vision. So as a member of the public, I'll just say that I am aligned with this vision, and I think it would be wonderful if we could accomplish this. I will put faith in the idea that if we could get more funding, then we would be pursuing this general vision and framework, and that would be a great thing for the city of San Mateo. And as a member of the public who rides a bike, and would love to see this come to fruition, and with some understanding that ridership is a key piece of that, I will be doing what I can to try to make this a reality by getting people to ride, by singing the praises of each small victory that we get along the way. And I will probably leave it at that for now. Thank you very much.
Michael Reagan.
Good evening. Thanks for listening to me. I want to thank Sue Ellen and her staff first. I was on the Citizens Committee along with Mark and several other people that worked very hard, and you guys did a great job putting this together. I was going to say one thing, but after listening to you guys, I kind of get the feeling that I'm going to head in a different direction. 211, the bike plan failed. This plan will fail. And it'll fail because we're not getting behind it as a city, as what you guys do is what Public Works, what City Council does. You guys got to get behind this. There's going to be a cost. It's going to cost a lot. It's not like we're starting a city and we're instituting a bike passed within a brand-new city with brand-new streets and such. It's going to be a lot of work to try to get this thing done because you're basically trying to fit it into a city that didn't have it before. But other cities have done it. Menlo Park, Palo Alto, other cities around the state have really put a lot of time and energy into getting this thing done. And we all need to work together to try to get this thing implemented. And if we keep running into cost factors and that type of thing, which are very important, but when we set it as a priority amongst the vision of how we want our city to be in the future, I think it's very important that we get behind this plan and push it through. The cost is going to vary, from my understanding being on this committee, was that we really don't know, because some of it's not going to be cost that much and others going to be much more expensive. Going over Hillsdale, down Peninsula Avenue, those types of projects are going to be much more expensive. But the push needs to come from within, and the city will adapt to it. And I think that will be something that we all will be of advantage. If we can get hundreds of cars off the street by taking bikes and other forms of transportation other than cars, it's going to make life much easier for all of us. And I think that would be something that, as what we hope you guys will do, we'll look to it as a project that's worthwhile and something that we all can look forward to. So thank you.
Drew?
Good evening, staff, members of the commission. So I think there's a lot of great things in this plan. A lot of hard work's been done. I reviewed the doc and I kind of scanned through every page quickly and stuff. Just a lot of good things. And even little things like the map legend. Now the order is most protected to least protected. It was a small thing, but now it's like makes sense. So moving on, since I only have 2.5 minutes now. So I think there's a couple things might be missing in the sense of a comment or some discussion around street lighting, and street lighting in the context of, I think there's some places where the lighting could be improved before you have to make major pavement changes in certain cases, and that might be a cheaper, just so people are visible at night, like night is right now, coming home from the Caltrain station. So I think something about lighting and how that fits in, because I think that would change certain priorities in certain locations potentially. I appreciate the stuff about micromobility, reading through there. And one thing I was thinking was potentially the signage discussion about how to sign routes, include in that about how to do the signage of individual routes on the pavement, on the street signs, things like that, to incorporate the micromobility. Another piece that I think potentially just needs, I asked about this in the past, but I think the 92 overcrossing up there. When I look on Google Maps and stuff, it appears we're taking out a house to pull this off versus using O'Farrell Street. And I think that we should just quickly work through that a little bit, because there's a development going through pre-application across the street here. And if we need a little bit of space on their land, if we need to go through O'Farrell to get to the other side, which is a parking lot, shopping center, get redeveloped, that we need to have the initial discussion now about that. And so that's incorporated in the development that's going to happen here. So my last point is, I look at this and I look at the future, 20 years from now, and I go to a lot of meetings, and I've had some discussions, so this won't be a shock to some of the staff, but I just think we need to have a section, and when I say section, it might just be a few pages incorporated, talking about the future farther than this plan. Caltrain has the 2040 business plan coming, and passing tracks, and we have grade steps through downtown to deal with, all the way actually to Burlingame. And this plan can plant seeds about how we would like to remove the wall of the train, and how that in time with each revision, that could be incorporated along the way. So when we're talking to Caltrain, about things. If I'm there in the public or someone from staff, we can say, you know, there's this vision that we want to do something. We don't know where exactly, but I could see a bike ped undercrossing somewhere north of 92, south of 9th Street, eventually with a grade set project. That's just, there could also be a multi-use path from the Belmont all the way through the city along the right-of-way. There's enough space in much of that corridor to do something like this. And it doesn't have to be designed with this plan, but just some initial discussion. And 5 years from now, when the business plan is a little longer, farther along, and when this next vision of the bike plan is coming, then that might be able to be added because there's a funding source through that. If Caltrans does 4 tracks through Hillsdale area, they can pay to help mitigate by putting undercrossings, by putting a path and stuff. And that's why getting it incorporated along with this and just planting the seeds at this time. Thank you for the extra minute.
Thank you very much.
Forrest Kenny.
Looks like we move on. Forrest Kenny.
Good evening, I'm Foster Kinney. I'm from Redwood City. I'm here because you're in this paper today about this meeting. And I want to just, I'm so pleased to follow what I just heard because I want to talk to you a little about the future. There's a great emphasis, every city on this peninsula is trying to get people on bikes. At the same time, there are more and more of us who are retiring and you're some aging citizens. But one of the problems of being an aging citizen, we lose our balance. And so many of you drive an SUV, but I want to introduce you to an SMV. Senior Mobility Vehicle. It's a 3-wheel, 3-speed, electric assist adult tricycle. And after a number of years of fighting the concept, I've actually bought one. And part of what I've found so far, and I'm very early in this procedure, is that streets are crowned, but a 3-wheeler really needs a flat bicycle lane. And so I'm just saying that maybe some other people will see a senior on a 3-wheel bike and feel like this will give them some mobility. And that's the clue. It's the mobility that is offered because a lot of people's family takes away their keys. My family took away my bicycle. And this is a solution. I do not intend to keep it in the garage. I intend to be visible on the peninsula. So you may see more of these. And as you're thinking about the future, this is something you may need to accommodate. Thank you.
That's a great point. Thank you.
That's all I have.
Okay, then bringing it about to the council, Commissioner St. Clair.
As positive as I like for the future of bikes and the need for it and the need to have access, I've said it in the past, we aren't a new developing city. We aren't a large area that has large areas to work with. We got tight streets, and coming up with these general plans are great, but I've also seen over the years where we developed or got developers on buildings to put in bike paths for a few blocks that stop and go nowhere, or go into the back of a parked car, or stop at another street, and there's no continuity of it, the whole process. And sometimes where everyone always looks to cities says, well, spend your money on the low-hanging fruit and fix these little things as you can. And working in with safe routes to schools and all that is great. But they're only proven after the fact, that you put them in, you spend the money, and then they're proven over time whether people use them or not. I'm more of an attitude that would always say, wherever the biggest bang for the buck, that we're gonna have the largest ridership, and comparing it to Vision Zero safety, we need that because you can't add a ton more bikes and have that safety factor if you put them in on narrow streets and uneven places that don't balance out with cars and people, because you see it all the time. It doesn't work. That's one thing. When we have a general plan, as we have, without having the right budget, in my opinion, and throwing it up the chain to the council and saying, council, here, let's look at this. I want to see more of a prioritized list that would say, here's what we know we can get these funds for. Even if we get the extra funds from different projects and stuff, I want to say what we have and how long it's going to take so that the council looks at it and goes, I agree with it. Not throw it to them and say, well, we don't have these numbers, and go back to us and have it go in a circle. That's what I want to try to avoid.
So I'm going to steal somebody's lines here. I too am also aligned with the vision. I think Adam had mentioned that is up here in terms of the prioritization. Though I'd like to spend a little bit more time on the hospital area. Sue Ellen, maybe we could do that offline. And that's really, that out of this map, that's what I would just kind of focus in on. We've got so many employees that just leave all at the same time, and how can we reduce that load? And frankly, I live close to 36th and Hacienda, and I'll share something with you. 36 between Hacienda into Edison is so narrow, I can barely get my Prius down the lane if I'm going southbound or northbound. So I don't know how we're going to get any bicycle lanes down it, but that's another matter, and we can look into that. Going back to, Mr. Elliott mentioned, and I would concur with this, I think this plan would be stronger, and we're kind of hearing a little bit about that. If we can go to the city council with the ask, we'll do the lifting here, and when I say the ask, that is present them with the budget, and these are the prioritized projects. As Commissioner Robbins said, they're juggling 50 items all at the same time, and we have the luxury of focusing in and drilling down on this particular topic. So I want to put that up front. And then finally, I would like to see more discussion on how we're going to incorporate, how we're going to get the other micro-mobility vehicles, devices, whatever we want to call them, signage, education, kiosks. And when I say signage, vertical signage on the streets, and there appears to be some pretty, I'm going to call standard nomenclature to go and do all of this. So I would like to see more of that incorporated, because this really is talking about the future. This is really micromobility, and a bicycle is just one type of device. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Robbins?
Same as I've done before.
I recognize the need to move this forward, right? I think, agreeing with a lot of what I heard in public comment and fulfilling our duty as our commission, I think that it would be important to see a prioritized list. It seems like that's in the final stages of completion, and seeing that before it goes to council, I think would be really important. I think in terms of funding, also, moving away, I know this is traditionally how plans have done it in the past, is seeking grant funding, but it'd be great to see in the funding strategy having the traffic impact fee be a source as well. in terms of funding as well, do we know, can I ask a question? Do we know if in the funding strategy, a lot of the bike plan will focus on education and outreach to, get people to use the bike lanes. And so I'm wondering if there's any plans to incorporate funding of community groups and nonprofits to do some of that legwork of education and outreach. And I know that that's something that, for example, Oakland is looking at doing to really make the outreach a little bit more broad and potentially specific to different populations in our community. And maybe that's something that will be, is being figured out for the funding strategy.
It depends on what the funding source is for the individual outreach efforts, because sometimes there are parameters. If it is a grant fund, sometimes there are parameters in terms of what it can be spent on. We've had discussions with the Parks and Rec Department about some of the education programs that are in here, because we've said, safe routes for seniors or bike education for adults and for kids, and that would be integrated with Parks and Rec. So there's no funding identified, but that I think the different programs might have different sources, and we can look at if there are opportunities to be more definitive in where those sources may be for the different support programs.
Yeah, I just really encourage us to really think more flexibly about, seeing the city as one of the many actors that can help do the outreach and education around this work. In terms of lighting, I also saw that it's folded into a measure around roadway maintenance with street sweeping. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to kind of call out lighting. I know that's one of the really big barriers to biking. I know it's the reason why I didn't bike here tonight. And so I think I would challenge us to think a little bit about maybe calling that out as a specific measure in terms of miles of lighting completed. I know that sounded miles of lighting completed, but miles of roadway with lighting updated. And I'll just wrap this up by saying I think we will need to look at the project list before going forward. It seems like that's the direction that the commission is going. And I'd also encourage us to think about, we will really have to think about ourselves as riders and continue to expand this, the vision of this plan personally, and encourage those in our spheres to do the same.
Great. Couple more comments here. I want to echo one of the comments we received with regards to inclusion of some assessment of the last plan and what's been achieved. I do think that that's important to include here, because we need to understand where we've been and how that informs this particular plan and how it's different. I want to come back to the discussion around funding probability. I know that that's uncomfortable, but any funding plan has got to make an assessment about funding probability. And that includes a couple things. So we have a long list of prospective grant sources. What's our confidence level on having the staffing to be able to actually put together the proposals to pursue these funding sources aggressively? So do we have the time and capacities to go after them aggressively now?
So I haven't looked at that whole list, but since I've been here, we've been applying for every opportunity of grant we can. Now, has that been as robust as it could be? I'm not going to say that that's true because of limited staff time.
Sure.
But we do take every opportunity we can. Those are competitive grants, especially the ones that are either local or Bay Area wide. So they're very competitive. Everybody needs money because there's not many cities that actually fund this other than through grant processes or their street programs. So, yeah, I mean, we continue to try to get as many grants and take advantage of that as we can. I will also say that there's usually a grant match needed as well. So one of my goals over the course of the last few years is to try to actually have some fund balance in some of our funding, like Measure A funds or something like that, to where we could actually apply for the grants, because it's difficult to apply for a grant when you don't have the match to match the grant as well.
Yes.
So that kind of puts us, you know, in a bad spot. We manage to usually find the funds, but it's just kind of backwards. So we're trying to take those steps as well.
So where I'm headed with this is, you know, if we have a history of applying for 2 grants a year, or do we have a history of applying to 20 grants a year, right? Those are very different numbers, and the probabilities of success are going to be very, very different, right? Depending on how many grants we actually have the capacity to apply for. So right there, out of the gate, we should be able to get a reasonably informed sense of what our prospects are. And you know, in thinking about bringing this to the council, if I were a council member, what I would find useful is, you know, okay, we have a light green, greener, and deep green option in terms of how this is a capital plan, right? That's what this bike plan is. And, you know, the light green could say, okay, well, we think we can hit, you know, with our current staffing levels and no additional dedicated funding, we think we can hit, you know, blank, you know, is probably reasonable for us to hit. And, you know, this is what we need, and we've got all those things. And maybe the slightly greener version is, okay, we think we can, you know, do more if we have a certain increment of dedicated funding, whether it's whatever the funding sources that have been described here. And then the deep green maybe is, okay, and we do a more aggressive, serious investment with dedicated funding, and we think because of that, we'll also be able to leverage so much more, you know, external funding, third-party funding. And in those levels, you could say, okay, maybe level 1 is we get, you know, half of the high priority bike areas done in 5 years, right? And then the medium green is we get all of the highs and some of the mediums in 5 years. I'm just making this up, right? But at least you would have some frame of reference for the decision-making process. And I really think that for a plan like this to be really genuinely useful, it's got to have something along that order. And finally, you know, we've had a lot of discussion here on the fact that the bike plan is actually a mobility plan for more than just biking. And, you know, the last gentleman made an excellent point with regards to senior mobility. You know, I think we should take a look at how we're naming this and the imagery that we're using in the plan. You know, maybe it's a bike and micromobility plan, maybe, you know, I don't know, bike and mobility plan. And really think about the imagery we're using just to start to, you know, turn this into what it really is in terms of how we're presenting it. Have the representation actually represent what we aspire for this plan really to be. So those are all my comments. So I think the direction here is to come back to the commission. Is there anything else that staff needs from us?
No, I think that we'll incorporate these comments along with the public comment that we received throughout this process. The comment period for the draft plan ends this Friday, the 13th. I hate saying that. And so we've received comment through our open house, through our citizen advisory group, through our website, and we'll incorporate all of that public comment coming into the final plan, and then we'll schedule another session with the commission at that time.
Great. And I'm sorry, one last question. The high priority bike segments, how many miles is that?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, it would be really great in a reasonable time frame that we could do that segment, right? So if the plans, presented to the council we're going to get the high priorities done in X number of years, that's a good, clean metric in getting an important part of this plan done. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
All right.
I've seen the presentation.
Okay.
I will return.
All right. Commissioner Robbins will return shortly, but we will go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. Thank you again for all your great work on this. So we have the draft 2020 Climate Action Plan. No, we're going to continue.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Andrea Chow. I'm the Sustainability Analyst with the City Manager's Office. I'm excited to be here tonight to talk about our Climate Action Plan. And so tonight is the 5th time that we're bringing this item to the Commission. We've attached the draft 2020 Climate Action Plan for your review, and I have here in front of us our consultants' Placeworks, and so I'll let them take it from here.
Good evening, Tammy Seal with Placeworks. I'm going to turn it over to Eli to provide an overview of how we got here tonight, the process we went through this year to develop the Climate Action Plan, and then we'll look forward to your comments and questions.
Good evening, Commissioners. As Tammy mentioned, my name is Eli Crispy with Placeworks. I'll be giving you a brief presentation this evening. Today or tonight, we're really going to be going over at a higher level the draft 2020 Climate Action Plan and talking about the next steps for CAP adoption. Just to reiterate a bit as to why we're here in the first place, as I'm sure you all know, the current Climate Action Plan was adopted in 2015, and it sets policies and an emission level to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. That cap has largely been very successfully implemented, and as of 2017, San Mateo's greenhouse gas emissions were 18% below the baseline level, so that 2020 target has been met and has in fact been exceeded. But there is now a need to stay consistent with state law that has changed since 2015. There are now longer-term greenhouse gas reduction targets that were not accounted for in that earlier climate action plan. We also want to build on some of the recent policies that San Mateo has adopted in partnership with other agencies and other jurisdictions on the peninsula. And of course, we want to make sure that this climate action plan integrates and supports the ongoing general plan update. The Climate Action Plan update process involved the preparation of a greenhouse gas inventory for the calendar year 2017, forecasting those greenhouse gas emissions out to 2050, identifying the greenhouse gas reduction efforts from existing and planned projects, both the city's projects as well as those being undertaken at a regional and statewide level. We have developed an updated set of greenhouse gas reduction strategies to address those emissions. Some of these are updates to the policies that are in the 2015 cap. Others are entirely new. That then led to an implementation strategy, a work plan, identifying potential levels of staff involvement, time frame for implementation, and the like. And we have then combined all of these efforts to bring you the draft 2020 CAP document that was in your packet. And throughout this process, there has been an ongoing public outreach and engagement effort. We have, as I mentioned, there have been 5 meetings now with this commission. There have been ongoing discussions with city staff, and there have, of course, been public engagement efforts, both online and in person. We had there were the 5 meetings with this commission. There was a June 6th public workshop at the city library that was very well attended, about 50 attendees, provided some very excellent feedback about the greenhouse gas reduction policies that are in this climate action plan. And there has, of course, been the ongoing discussion with city staff. So we have taken the feedback at every step in this process, and that we have constantly been updating and revising the material that's ultimately now in this draft climate action plan to reflect what we have heard from you all and from city staff and from members of the public. To refresh a bit as to what we have discussed at past meetings of the commission, at the first meeting back in January, there was an update of the CAP process, and we shared some of the results of that 2017 inventory. In March, we discussed the forecast of future greenhouse gas emissions, some of the existing and planned efforts that were underway to reduce those emissions, and then we started discussing the new suite of greenhouse gas reduction measures that are now in this plan. The May 8th meeting saw an expanded discussion of the greenhouse gas reduction measures, and then when we last came to you in September, we went a little more into the calculation details of those methods, talked about what the numbers were, how we arrived at them, what are the supporting assumptions. So in the 2020 CAP, it follows the same layout as the 2015 CAP, uses the same template, so its appearance should be quite familiar. But what we have updated is, of course, the greenhouse gas reduction measures, revised some of them, removed a few, added a few new ones. We have updated the list of existing and planned activities to account for action that's been taken since 2015. There's a discussion of climate change science in the CAP that has been updated in accordance with the latest science and the most recent studies. We have updated targets, particularly the longer term targets out to 2030 and 2050. And with those changes to the greenhouse gas reduction measures, there are now changes to the work program and the CAP checklist, which is an appendix to the CAP and supports making sure that new development projects are moving forward in a way that's consistent with the climate action plan. The greenhouse gas reduction targets were updated to follow the state's recommendations that they've laid out in the Senate Bill 32 scoping plan, which was adopted in 2017, as well as other sources of state guidance. We want to make sure that the climate action plan continues to serve as a qualified greenhouse gas reduction strategy, which means that it can be used by new development projects for streamlining their environmental review. And as a part of that, the greenhouse gas reduction targets in the plan have to be appropriate at the plan level for the community-wide greenhouse gas reductions, but they also have to support reduced greenhouse gas emissions for individual development projects. So in light of all that, these are the targets that are laid out in the draft plan. The 2020 target remains the same, 15% below 2005 levels, which is equivalent to 1990 levels, according to state guidance. And then for the longer term targets, we have, in accordance with state recommendations, switched over to a per capita metric, which measures the greenhouse gas emissions per resident. So for 2030, that level is proposed to be 4.3 metric tons per person. For 2050, that would be 1.2. So in moving forward now, we hope this meeting will be an opportunity to review and discuss this draft 2020 CAP. We are hoping that you will be able to provide comments by December 18th, next week. And then after review by this commission, we hope to bring this plan forward to City Council for adoption. We have tentatively scheduled a January 6th study session. That schedule is, of course, flexible. It is our hope after the study session that there will be a planning commission review of the general plan amendment and EIR addendum that goes along with this climate action plan. And then following the study session and the review by planning commission of those documents, we hope that there will be the final city council meeting where they will be able to take action on the climate action plan. So thank you very much for your time. We'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Commissioner, clarification questions? Commissioner Nunez?
Just one. I remember at our, first of all, thank you. I remember at our September meeting, we talked about 2030, not the measures that were in the plan that came to us in September didn't help us meet our 2030 goals. Is that correct? Or we were a little bit above them, right?
That was based on using the state's 2030 target as presented for the state's plan. So that was I think at that time we were looking at 40% below 1990 by 2030. So we've since translated that to be more appropriate for San Mateo.
Okay, got it.
So we have a big workbook that goes with that, but that's what we've done since that meeting.
That was my only question.
My question is tied to moving forward. Once the plan goes to council and is adopted, one thing I've noticed, and it's going to sound a little bit like our last discussion that I know you're out in the audience, we've got some good, I think Chapter 3, you've got some good strategies going forward, but we don't have a lot of specifics. Is really directed towards staff. Is there a plan to come up with some specifics to take to council along the lines of where we've got general statements about maybe we'll make the permitting easier and less costly? Is there some thought that down the line we would actually come up with specifics, which in lieu fee, or, this is if you electrify your building, you can get an extra floor, because it's a public benefit or something like that? Is there?
Right. So you're right. The Climate Action Plan is a very high-level strategy that sets a large stage for all of the potential opportunities to help advance our goals. And so they are at a high level without all the specifics. Chapter 4 does summarize some of the potential with each measure for implementation. And so there is a general idea of city staff time and time frame. And so it gives a little bit more detail to whether these measures are near-term, immediate goals. So that's on a per measure basis. But after the plan is adopted, that is really staff's job to go through and strategize and prioritize where we can move on each measure. Do you have anything to add?
I also want to add that, we do purposely keep it very high level. The field of sustainability is just constantly evolving and evolving really, really quickly. So it allows us to really be very flexible in taking advantage of opportunities that arise, for example, through the county's Office of Sustainability and partnerships, or through Peninsula Clean Energy. And sometimes you can't even conceive of the options that might be available even in 2 to 3 years' time. So that's how the prior CAP was written. And we were able to very successfully address sort of the measure topics with the guidance of the suggested bullets that are listed for each, but not always necessarily following the letter of all of them based on opportunities that arose.
I appreciate that, and if the chair will give me a little forbearance, just to clarify the reason for my question, my comment will not be that this plan should have specific projects in it. I understand totally and appreciate what staff is saying, but that it would be nice for council to be aware that it is that there's some sense that staff will be coming up with some specific proposals, and for them to bless. Obviously, it has to come through the commission and back up to council, but to maybe get direction from them to to actually start coming up with real projects.
Great. Yeah, and one way that staff has done that is through annual updates on our climate action plan implementation process, and that goes both to the commission first and then to council on an annual basis.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Warinsky.
I think some of my questions focused on what Commissioner Robbins have talked about. So once this high-level document is complete, what is, and when I say complete, approved by City Council, and work with the Planning Commission, what is the review cycle?
We are anticipating every 5 years. As you know, the last climate action plan was adopted in 2015, and we're about 5 years later. So that's kind of our general vision.
Right. And so it's, when you say 5 years, it's something similar to what we have just gone through.
Right. And then as I mentioned before, every year I track metrics and provide updates to both the commission and the council. Some are more quantitative and some are qualitative.
Right. So it's in that annual review that we will see concrete implementation steps.
Yeah.
These are the steps that we took.
Yes.
And maybe that might answer, and we will get a review of that.
Yes.
Okay. REACH codes, which are important. REACH codes are updated every 3 years.
That's right.
And the cap every 5 years with an annual review. Now, are REACH codes, I believe there are REACH codes in here.
Yes.
So if REACH codes change, is that reflected in this document?
Yes, actually, Raphael actually brought that up to make sure that we clearly explain that this climate action plan will encompass multiple code cycles, because code cycles, as you mentioned, are every 3 years, and this cap is kind of a 5-year vision, even 10 years with our 2030 greenhouse gas emission reduction goal. So that is reflected in this document, and staff will be working closely with the commission and with council through every code cycle to bring the REACH codes process back.
All right, so that will be updated accordingly. So I think, like I said, the plan is very good. Obviously, we've been working on this a long time. So if it's approved by council, let's say March. Our next update in terms of an annual update and concrete steps that was taken by staff, that would be roughly first quarter of 2021.
I would probably return to the commission and council in May or June, because it's been 1 year since I provided an update on those actual projects that we've made progress on.
Right, okay. And these are the steps to reduce the greenhouse gas, because I'm still, look, this is a high level, and it's a lot of modeling, and I never know how one measures success. Measuring success in this document is challenging. Just because it's so theoretical, it really is, with a lot of assumptions. But neither here nor there, we have to do our steps, and in the process, we'll be reducing some greenhouse gases. Okay, thank you.
To add on to that, so I think you're absolutely right that it is sometimes challenging to measure success. So on the annual basis, and Raphael and Greg can recall this, we come back and talk about all the actions that we've taken, but it's only pretty much on the 5-year intervals where we get the updated greenhouse gas emissions inventory that we really know how successful we've been. And that is a challenge, and that will remain a challenge because it is really only possible to do those full inventories around that time frame, because they're very in depth. So we do our best to provide any quantitative information to measure what we expect as progress, but we may not know until we're updating the plan again whether we've really managed to hit the targets.
Thank you for the update. Again, like everyone was just saying, trying to quantify this is hard, because basically in the future, if all of a sudden you had a huge influx of people, like San Jose used to have nothing, and all of a sudden they grew huge. If you have it in that 5-year period, it changes all your per capita numbers too. So is there anything in the update from everything else we've learned over all the years and all the advice that is new and on the edge that would change something dramatically? And is there anything in this that we should be concerned with that other cities are larger, cities are doing that we should be looking at also for this update?
Well, I can answer, I think, the second part. I don't think, we do not have any concerns about what's in your cap. We think that it's, the strategies are appropriate and feasible for San Mateo, and they're not, I think they're what we call, in some cases, daring but doable. They're not high risk. There's many no regret strategies. You're going to get a good return on implementation of the cap. And the city has so far a very good track record. We have declining emissions, and we'll continue to see declining emissions over time as long as we continue to implement the cap. And
I can highlight two things that I think are interesting and new about this cap. One is that we have a section on building electrification. That wasn't something that was in the previous cap. It's really focused on talking about how we can electrify our built environment and how that can contribute to our goals. And I think the other thing that's worth highlighting came up in the last item is this idea of micromobility and shared mobility. That's also something that was not as much of a focus in the 2015 cap that is mentioned and identified here as another opportunity.
Thank you.
I have one question before we turn to public comment. On the REACH code quantification, does the quantification shown factor in doing a REACH code with each building cycle?
The quantification does factor in those changes to the building cycle. Whether it's done through a REACH code or other mechanisms, the reduction in energy use for new buildings is something that's factored in, and we do take into account how those standards increase every 3 years.
So the REACH codes could include energy efficiency, but they could also include building electrification and EV infrastructure measures, and presumably each REACH code, each building cycle would have increased levels of electrification, efficiency, and EV readiness. So did we factor all of that ratchet into that quantification?
Yes, so there's a ratcheting up of the EV standards, of energy efficiency for mixed fuel buildings, as well as energy efficiency in all electric buildings.
But also building electrification. So
Yes.
presumably in 3 code cycles, probably every new building, if not sooner, would be all electric. Not just mixed fuel. We probably, we're talking 10 years here.
We did not assume that all new buildings at some point in the future would be all electric, because that's not necessarily the direction that we have firm modeling on from the state. But we do assume a constant ratcheting up of energy efficiency, whether it's mixed fuel or all electric buildings.
Okay, so I think maybe that assumption should be tested in light of the fact that we already have 20 cities across the state that have adopted REACH codes, and most of those are all electric required for space and water heating. And in some cases, many of those are outright natural gas bans for certain building segments. So even in the time of developing this climate action plan, there's been a huge amount of movement in terms of building codes, and it seems like we are probably on a more aggressive track overall than might be suggested from those calculations.
I do want to say, though, that it's probably, we're conservative in our calculations.
Sure.
So obviously if things become more progressive and move in that direction, we'll do better. So we can certainly look at that, but there's not a harm in underestimating our greenhouse
Sure.
gas reductions. There's a harm in overestimating.
That's a fair point. Then maybe this comment really is about how we think about the language in the cap, and that we should encourage aggressive language. in the cap around the reach codes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, why don't we turn to public comment?
I don't have any.
Don't have any on the climate action plan. All right. Okay, I'm surprised. Okay, we'll bring it back to the commission. Commissioner St. Clair? No? Commissioner Warinsky?
When you go to city council, you'll have the study session in January, and then you've got planning commission and then city council. I don't know if it's possible to do this, but maybe include some concrete implementation steps. I don't know what they would be. But,
Sure.
just something to think. It takes a very abstract theoretical document and starts to ground it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, I actually agree with Susan. I wouldn't hold anything up. I will vote when we talk about it to recommend bringing this forward, as you've asked. And whether you come up with some options just for the study session, purely for discussion purposes, or if once the dust settles in this plan, which I think is a great plan, by the way, thanks everybody for the hard work, I would just ask or encourage staff to do that wonderful voodoo that y'all do, which is to come up with some actual steps that the city can start considering. I personally am a big fan of incentives over mandates, so that's why I look at the permitting process and fees, but I just think the council will appreciate that down the line, and maybe more importantly, I think that'll be able to show some real benefit to the city, even though I agree totally with Kathy that there's stuff that'll happen in year 3 that we've not even heard of yet. But there are a few things we can do, for example, on the building electrification and on vehicle charging. I mean, 2 of the bigger ticket items on here. There are probably some things that better minds than I have you can come up with some ideas and get them moving. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Nunes?
This is really exciting, and I'm, I think, just so thankful of staff for putting so much really great thought, and to the consultants to putting so much great thought into this. Sustainability is a changing field, and I think the plan allows for that flexibility, and I think that that's something that, we should be thinking about. I trust that staff will, find the extreme next steps to scope out what work plan would work to implement these measures. And our task tonight is to recommend whether to bring this forward to the council, and I think we have clear steps on that.
Okay, and I would echo the comments that have been made. I'm going to take the liberty of running through the comments that I sent by email just so that we have it here recorded. We've discussed the reach codes already, and again, the recommendation to clarify that we would be looking at reach codes for each building cycle, so that's already been discussed. Number 2, I raised a question around measure ME2, which is the municipal energy efficiency measures, and that it would be good to look at electrification at the same time as efficiency and PV measures are being implemented. And that perhaps we could even look at setting a goal for municipal building and overall operation decarbonization within the time frame of the cap. And I understand from staff that we'll look at making some adjustments in that area. The next item for CF3, which is on electric vehicle fleets, consideration for establishing an EV first procurement policy. And I understand that there are many different vehicle classes and it may not apply to all vehicle classes and so forth. So for vehicle classes that might fit, it would be great to have that as a prospective measure. CNG, compressed natural gas, and here we had some dialogue with staff So I raised the question about whether CNG vehicles are much available, and maybe in the interest of having this in the, in the recording, maybe I can get a response here from staff about where CNG vehicles are going, because in the last meeting, the commission meeting we had, there was communication that I understood suggested that CNG vehicles were difficult to find.
So I had responded to this piece about CNG vehicles. I wanted to apologize for the conflicting information because we had voiced that they had been difficult to find. I do think the procurement of these CNG vehicles was a difficult process, but we were able to acquire quite a few numbers of CNG vehicles and add them to our fleet. So I think it isn't quite clear what the plan is for future procurement, but we are hopeful and excited that the CNG vehicles will take advantage of the fueling station at the wastewater treatment plant.
Great, and for clarity here, these vehicles would be using the biomethane that's coming off of the wastewater treatment plant. Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, I raised a question on ST1 on bicycles, whether we should be talking about all micromobility options, and maybe you can comment, Andrea, on that item.
Sure. So our sustainable transportation section has a few measure areas, one separating bicycles from pedestrian mode share from shared mobility. And so Raphael brought up this great point that was also addressed earlier today about how bike lanes are often used for different types of micromobility devices. Since we use that bike mode share measure and attribute that to certain greenhouse gas emission reductions, we want to keep that specific to bicycles. And so the recommendation is that we change our, I'm forgetting what ST measure is, but it's the sustainable transportation measure related to shared mobility, to talk more broadly about micromobility and shared mobility together. At this point in time, it's still a supportive measure because we can't quantify that, but as we've talked about, it's an important one and a growing trend.
Great, thank you. And then the last item was in relation to, in the implementation plan around the question of state policy. In many cases, municipal actions can sometimes run into barriers that relate to state regulations or state policies. And my suggestion here was to look at incorporating into the implementation plan some discussion around identifying where there may be state level barriers and where appropriate activating the city's capacity to inform state policy, whether it's through the League of the Cities or other avenues, to help address those barriers. Okay, and those were all of my comments. Any reactions or follow-on comments on anything that I've suggested here? Okay, then shall we entertain a motion?
I'll certainly move that we recommend that the cap be brought forward to City Council.
I would second that motion.
Can I make a friendly amendment and say that this would be approved as amended, because we've recommended several amendments?
Yeah, yes, you can. I mean, I don't know we have a guarantee that these comments will all be incorporated. They're heard, some will be.
Yeah,
they are? Okay.
The goal is to have
hold
this.
things up because, I don't want there to be a violation of the motion if it turns out you said that way it didn't make sense, even though we asked for it.
With staff discretion on what's appropriate. How about that?
Our commission has the ability to submit comments by December 18th. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so our motion wouldn't be, if we submitted comments by then, we would still be able to.
It doesn't preclude that.
Right.
Right. So if the motion is to approve the climate action plan as amended with staff discretion over final refinements.
If I may, since I made the motion, I actually wouldn't go that detail. I'd say we recommend that the plan be submitted to, it's the actual words, that it be brought forward to City Council and that it would be subject to further changes by the staff as they accept our comments and public comment, because the period's not closed. Does that work?
Any objections, Susan, since you made the second?
No, I don't.
Okay, all right. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you all. All right, and with that, we are moving on to reports and announcements.
I had a reach code update that I wanted to provide tonight. I'm excited to report that our reach codes went before the California Energy Commission this afternoon and were approved. And so our energy code amendments are officially official and will go into effect January 1 of 2020. I also reached out to my state contact for an update on the high-rise multifamily cost-effectiveness study. There is movement on their side, but unfortunately, no public draft or anything to review. I learned that I might be getting a better update in the next few days, so I'm still hoping to learn more, but that is all I know right now.
We are hopeful that we could perhaps bring that forward, at least an update on what's in that in February. But again, the actual timing's out of our control, so we don't have it on the crystal ball. But our fingers are crossed and our breath is held that that will be able to happen.
Great. Thank you. Other announcements? Brad?
In January, we would actually like to split up and have Cal Water come to a future meeting and just have Bosca come in January. That's the staff's preference. So if you're okay with that, we would move forward with that presentation with Bosca in January.
And just for our clarity, Brad, the reason for splitting those up would be?
I think it provides Bosca some potentially more freedom to speak before you.
Okay.
Without Cal Water, one of the purveyors in the room.
Okay.
So.
All right.
And it's two different things. I mean, one's water service, and one's the big picture aspect. And so, we'd like you to focus on the big picture aspect first, and then we could drill down into the other service aspects.
Any comments or objections? I have no objection. Okay.
And then I think the other thing, because we tabled, Commissioner Wierenski had some interest of other items, and so just getting your concurrence that those are things that the commission would like to have brought forward. One of those was the South Bay Waste Management Association, SBWMA, and if Commissioner Wierenski could kind of remind us what she would like presented, and that way you could all hear that firsthand, and then make a call.
Sure. So back, there's a couple of items. Back in October of 2018, we had heard a presentation from Roxanne regarding the newly enacted Chinese policy to reduce, to reduce the contamination of recycled materials that we sell to their market. And, the current contamination, I recall, was about 3%. The Chinese policy now requires 0.5%. So, with that policy restriction, and China by far is the global import market in terms of recycled waste or recycled products. In addition, SB 1383, which is effective on January 1 of 2020, requires a 50% statewide reduction in organic waste to the landfill by a certain time, and that goes up to 75% reduction by 2025. So my thought was to have South Bay Recycling, which does the recycling. They are the group that would figure out how do we meet these compost levels outlined in SB 1383, and likewise, what are we doing to meet the contamination requirements set forth by China. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from South Bay how they plan to do this. So that was one of my first requests, and that's not necessarily urgent, but we are at 2020 and SB 1383 is in force. The other item, which is very specific to our city that I had brought up, has to do, I kind of call it the bread and butter of public works. That is, and I might have mentioned back in October, I do hear from people, we have our crosswalks are around the city. Some are painted really well, some are faded. We have parking lines that need to be painted. We have vertical signage that's been faded by the sun and at times illegible. And I understand Public Works has got a plan to address all of this and would love to hear it. It's not the sexy stuff, but it's the bread and butter stuff. And I would look at this I would first focus initially on the commercial areas, and I would look at the downtown commercial area, which, by the way, gets a whole different, what I'll call facelift, maintenance of curbs and parking lines and crosswalks than all the other commercial areas outside of downtown, be it in Fiesta Gardens or be it where I live. It's a very, very different cycle. So I'd like to bring that, I'd like to have that plan. I think there's things to talk about, Public Works has to talk about, and I'd like to have it on our agenda in 2020.
Comments? So why don't we take these one at a time on the recycling, composting, South Bay side, and we're talking painting maintenance?
Yeah, street maintenance. Curb painting, crosswalks, even painting the ornamental street lights, which, they currently contain lead. So, this is, I'm just going to call street maintenance 101. But Public Works has got plans to take care of all of that. I'd love to hear it.
Comments?
Yeah, though I apologize. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I will address them both, actually, because I think we should. And I do have to say, and I know it's going to sound stupid and humorous, but yes, I find crosswalks sexy, all this maintenance, because I live with it every day. I walk, so a lot. I have no problem putting either of these on our agenda, but it's subject to staff priorities and time constraints, really, ability. I guess if you can get the paper recycling folks with South Bay to come, then that's fine, as long as it doesn't bump something else that you have that's more urgent. And the street maintenance 101, I think, is a great idea, but it's when staff is ready to present. So my suggestion, or my preference would be to say, yes, let's get both these on the agenda, but I'd like to hear from staff, really Brad, as to whether that's something that can be done in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or just note it and do it when you can do it. I don't know that I'd want to bump anything that's already on the list. Here, I apologize, Jay.
I think if it's of interest of, Commissioner Rowinski, acknowledging that, but I also think that as a public agency that SBWMA might, be dealing with the growing pains of implementing regulation in January, so I'm flexible to a timeline on that. I understand that it will affect meeting our waste reduction goals, but flexible to the timeline on that. And then on the other piece, in terms of street signage and the bread and butter of Public Works, I would defer to staff as well as if there's if we're at a project milestone or a planned milestone, I think that would be appropriate, but I think, as an informational item, potentially, leaving that up to staff discretion to come forth to the commission.
Commissioner St. Clair?
A comment on something new or on that subject?
On these items and bringing them as agenda items.
I think if we have the time, if it's a fill-in and if it's a little update and we have the time, it would be up to staff to see when they can implement it and get it here to do it, due to the fact that we're already put out in the future and it's like the crystal ball. It's just one of those things that it would be nice to know where we are as we're being asked or what updates we have. But if it's going to be a long, drawn-out presentation and a lot of work, I think it needs to go down the chain.
I'm supportive of both of these items. They seem reasonable for us to have some discussion at it and at the discretion of staff in terms of timing.
So if I'll just weigh in here, I appreciate the flexibility because while we list items to be scheduled, there are items that just come up that are very important for us to bring towards you, right, that we need to bring forward. So, realistically, I think the South Bay Waste Management, we can converse with them and see when it might be convenient, when it might be convenient for them to show up. As far as the Street Maintenance 101, it's really more of an informational issue, right? So I'm happy to bring something like that forward to you. And I think you'll probably see some of our budget constraints with those efforts as well. So that would be probably down the way a little bit because some more pressing items that we're working on, but happy to try to start putting something like that together.
Okay, great. Any other last announcements?
I have some firsthand. Yesterday, we all have the areas and then our traffic action plan has the problems. We all know that on the outskirts around Fiesta Gardens, 19th Avenue, how we have Fashion Island, so many people trying to get through there, and it's been a nightmare. And we're looking at future things to do right there. But firsthand, I see it constantly. And I see the volume of people who are moving into Station Green, the Heinz buildings, and everything. And I am seeing now where it's the cars coming southbound on Grant to turn east to left on Fashion Island are going 2 feet and pulling up behind 4 cars in the intersection and blocking the intersection that no other cars can go. And by the time it goes through a whole session of signals, they pull forward, and another set of people do it the same because they don't want to just sit there and let one car go at a time. Because sometimes it can go through a light signal the whole second because each area pulling into that, trying to go that way, will block the whole intersection. They'll just block. Yesterday, I sat there for 3 light set turns to go north in the Trader Joe area, and the cars were still, their back tires were at the crosswalks trying to turn left. And as the light would turn, that car would go 1 car. And then the next light would go through and the car behind them would pull into their spot. And it just stayed that way. And all of a sudden an ambulance pulled up and a fire truck pulled up. And they went the wrong way on Grant, went past because they couldn't go east, went to go on the other side on the westbound on Fashion Island, and it was so backed up with cars, they couldn't go. So they were stuck being blocked by the cars in the intersection because they couldn't even go north. It was just a complete cluster. And again, that should be a higher priority because that's one of the items that we've been discussing. It's a little bit problematic when you see an ambulance that needs to get somewhere and a fire truck that needs to get there. I sat there with them for at least 4 to 5 minutes with their sirens going, and they were just shaking their heads too because they couldn't back up. They couldn't go forward. And again, it would be different if they could have gotten around the cars and gone into the parking lot at the YMCA and cut in over there. But even that, they couldn't go forward. They were stuck. They were landlocked, and you could see them just in despair. So again, it's something we got to fix as a city. Oh, happy holidays too.
On that happy note.
So just a comment on that. We have a consultant engaged in a study of that corridor, and we anticipate that work being done in 3 or 4 months.
So is that something that we'll have an opportunity to get information on later in the year, Brad?
I haven't thought of that yet, but it's not something. I suppose if the commission's interested in that, I mean, it is a traffic action plan item that we're looking at. We could bring it forward.
Appetite on the part of the commission on this item?
If you want to, I mean, for information, but due respect to Greg, and I know that that's a real problem, resolution is what counts, not so much reporting to us each of these resolutions. That's my 2 cents.
I would have to agree with that.
I think if it's part of TAP, it might be an opportunity to get this update and then our next TAP update.
Any sense of, just for our frame of reference, when a TAP update might be appropriate, Brad?
I think we just recently did one, right? So,
yeah.
So probably late next year, yeah.
Okay. All right. And with that, I think we will adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.